I want to say it's nice that you've made it, Peppermint. I heard you weren't going to make it. You were like in Virginia or somewhere.
I was in Virginia. I had a gig and I was really torn in so many ways. And I busted my ass. I did not sleep, and we drove all night from Roanoke, Virginia.
And the only reason why I
don't take pictures.
That's a true drag queen, honey.
The only reason why I said that is because when I started, since this is a New York panel, when I first started working as a queen in New York, Peppermint was the bitch of the night. She ran New York. She ran it. She was on every magazine, working every club. And ironically, just like tonight, she was always a little bit late, but barely made it in time. And it was because she was working 5 gigs a night.
She got gigs.
Yes, man.
So I was just like, this is very reminiscent of old New York, because she'd be like, girl, if they ask, I'm in the bathroom. But I have a gig down the street and I'll be back in 30 minutes.
Bitch gotta get paid, honey.
But today we're not talking about Roanoke. We're talking about New York City.
Yes.
So let's start with the first question. What is the best thing about being a queen from New York City? Acid Betty.
Why do I have to be first? Because we're the best. I know Chicago people are like, no. But I think that with like people like Lady Bunny and Kevin Aviance and even Lee Bowery came over here to like do his thing. I felt like those were the spearheads of today's drag, and I felt like that happened in New York. And also, you know, this is called RuPaul's DragCon, and RuPaul started here. A thing about New York drag, though, that people don't understand that is always brought up is that the difference between New York queens and any other queen is to do drag in New York is you either have to wear it fully. We don't drive cars here. So it's like taxis. Do you know what I mean? So think about that. When you go to Texas or you go to New Orleans, they got a car. They pack it up with 10 costumes. They got their own like dressing room.
They got the AC.
New York gives you a spotlight, maybe a microphone that works, maybe. You know, and you got to look fierce, look professional, and impress people that just came off a Broadway show. You know, that's New York queens.
New York is, you know, a center, not the center, but a center for fashion, for theater, for business and finance, for art and culture. And so many people are drawn to New York City like a huge magnet. And every one of those different people, they contribute to the temperature and the flavor of New York City. So anyone that's in the city is affected by that, including drag. And then you also have the other layer of just being in a big city anyway. It's a rat race. Like Betty was saying, there's no dressing room. This stuff doesn't work. You're your own. I think drag queens in general, we are Renaissance folks anyway. We're our own makeup artists and hairstylists and choreographers and designers. But in New York, there's an edge to all that. And so that transfers into drag too, and I think that's what makes New York anything, including drag queens, a little bit more multifaceted than maybe if that same person were in another city.
There's been 3 winners from New York City, Sasha, Bianca, and Bob. And I think that I was talking to Bianca about it, and I said, why do you think queens from New York do so well on the show? And she said, because in order to succeed or to survive in New York City, you have to be very, very sort of multi-talented and all these things that vet you very well for the show.
And unique. And New York is very specific on you. You have to be unique, I feel.
True.
What queens inspired you, Peppermint, when you got your start?
Well, when I started in the 90s, there was like the only use for the internet was like AOL chat rooms. And it took about 5 minutes to look at a picture. So we weren't looking at Instagram and getting things from that. You know, I think, of course, I had a lot of inspiration throughout my life, but I think in terms of drag and New York drag, I was drawn to a book called Queens of New York. I was drawn to the movie Wigstock. And, you know, it didn't even occur to me that all these queens at the time were living in New York. All these queens, you know, obviously drag queens of New York, they're from New York. And it was just so attractive to me. I knew that that's where I had to be. And so that's really where I kind of got the notion that, okay, I want to do drag, you know?
What about the difference between Manhattan drag and Brooklyn drag? Horrorchata, talk about what is Brooklyn drag to you?
I think Brooklyn drag we're a lot more hairier. No, I'm just kidding.
Hairy!
We don't, you know, I forgot to shave. I have a little like, I mean, we don't care. I think a lot of the performers in Brooklyn drag is very experimental. They like thought out their numbers and they present like it's beauty and art. I'm not saying that Manhattan is not like that. But
Well, what are you saying?
I'm just saying we're art girls in Brooklyn, you know. But I keep it real cute. I keep it bangy and I keep it artsy. So
I think that's a cop-out, and I'm not attacking you. Brooklyn drag is exactly what Manhattan drag was in the East Village before the East Village
exactly,
became too
but
expensive
then
for people who live in Brooklyn to live in East Village.
And
it's the same
exactly.
people, the same ingredients, and it's the same artistic, queer, colorful people who are now being pushed out
Exactly.
by
I agree.
I mean, yeah,
you
that's
know,
I mean,
you know who we're
but
being pushed out
and
by.
it's Brooklyn drag. Okay, it's Brooklyn drag. Okay.
But yes, I mean, Michael Musso wrote an article that said that queer nightlife was dead.
No!
Oh, no.
I combated that with
I
saying
hate that.
queer nightlife has moved. And
Yes.
it's moved
Yes.
from Manhattan to
Yes,
Brooklyn.
yes.
It's true.
One of the things that I think fuels Manhattan drag is tourism. Do you think there's sort of right?
That is the difference between Brooklyn drag and Manhattan drag. Is like I go back to the Broadway. Broadway is a huge thing in New York and in drag culture. A lot of our drag queens now are wanted to be on Broadway and couldn't, were dancers, whatever. And so in New York, Manhattan, a lot of these people are getting just off a Broadway show, so they're seeing a free drag show and they're expecting high quality. And that's also the hard part about Manhattan is that not only are we drag queens performing for a general audience, we're actually performing for professional dancers, actors, performers.
That
and so they're
judge you.
definitely looking at us differently.
But Manhattan is more than just Times Square. I live in Harlem, and it's not, there's people from Broadway are not doing the same thing that they're doing in Hell's Kitchen. There's a totally different culture. And there's people of color, there's queer people of color, there's queer artists that live in other spaces than just Brooklyn. So I don't want anybody here who's here to think Manhattan is Times Square and Broadway and Brooklyn is artistic and creative, because we are everywhere. And I think that there's a lot of people who are in Brooklyn who travel and have traveled to other parts, and people from Manhattan who do shows in Brooklyn too. So it really does cross lines.
I might stir the pot, but I usually speak from the heart, and I'm very honest, so I'm just gonna say it. Me and Peppermint are a little bit older, and we've been doing drag a little bit longer.
What do you
Okay,
mean?
girl. Honey, I started in Texas, so let's not go there.
Right. So
Okay.
we were here in New York a little bit longer and a little bit
Okay.
older. And so we were doing our thing.
I'm a
and
princess. What can
She
you
knows where
say?
I'm going with this, but it's not to be mean or anything. I live in Brooklyn.
Girl, I was waiting for you to come for me, but let's do it, girl.
No, I'm not coming for
I'm
you.
just kidding. I'm just kidding. No,
I'm not-
I love this
Fine,
bitch.
I'm not coming for a chata. What I'm trying to
I'll sell tickets.
No, I was texting my girls like, I know Acid Betty.
Let her
Let's
talk,
see
let
where.
her talk, let her
But
talk.
no, no.
what I'm trying to do is quickly explain basically where Peppermint is coming from, and it has nothing to do with Horrorchata. I mean, it sort of does, but it was a series of people. That's why, because she's actually one of the founders of Bushwick and stuff. So we consider, it's you, but it's actually it's a whole community of people. She's just
Yeah, for sure. It's not
yeah.
just Bushwick is not just Brooklyn.
Right.
It's
But
everything. It's
really quick,
international.
what I was trying to say was we were Manhattan queens, and I've lived in Brooklyn for almost like 10, 12 years, but I was always considered a Manhattan girl, blah, blah, blah. And it's because we worked in Manhattan, but where Peppermint's coming from is kind of where I was coming from, is that we live in Queens, Long Island, Connecticut, Philadelphia, New Jersey, and the New Jersey queens are not like, oh, I'm a Jersey queen. I don't do that Manhattan thing. And I was really sensitive when the Brooklyn queen thing came out. And they were saying, well, we're Brooklyn queens, because I'm sensitive because I live in Brooklyn, and I wasn't considered a Brooklyn queen, but I lived there longer than the queens that were claiming they were Brooklyn queens.
Yeah.
Because
Speak
you
the
moved to
truth.
because
And
your
that's all.
gigs
Says the
are in
girl from
Manhattan,
Texas.
honey, and I
I'm
had to
done.
take over. So that's what happened. I like to say that not that I'm like
Fight?
Brooklyn, but you are older and I am the future. So yeah, totally get it.
Girl, guess what? When you get priced out of Williamsburg next week, you'll have a
Oh.
different story.
Oh, honey, I've been priced out 2 years ago. I'm in bedside, bitches. I'm a bedside queen.
This power and what she's saying, how she's interrupting, and this like energy is true. This is the next part of drag, and that's what going to full circle is with wig stock stopped, but Bushwick
Yes.
took over, and what happened? It moved to Brooklyn, and with this energy, and this is how it did it. And she's takes it personal, but
No, I don't think it. No, baby. I don't
Horrorchata,
take it
tell
per-
us, how did
I-
Bushwick
she's
begin?
right.
How
I don't
did
take it
Bushwick
per-
begin? How did
I mean,
Bushwick begin?
I would say Bushwick happened because like 7 years ago, there was so many fucking drag queens. Let's recreate, wig stock. And I reached out to Bunny, and she kind of was not living for me for a while, because But I would say 3 years ago, she passed over the torch and congratulated me, and she's now part of a Bushwick family too. So yeah.
Yes. Let's also talk about possibly what has your experience, Peppermint, been in the New York community with coming out as a trans drag queen?
At first, it was really well. There's probably like what was going on in my head, and then there was what was going on in reality, which I think is a lot of anyone can relate to, obviously, but people who are have a coming out can maybe relate to that. And it's not just queer people. I think that everyone kind of can have a closet, anyone, regardless of sexuality or gender or any of that. And so I did face what some people call microaggressions. I would hear people say to me years ago, oh, they would see me like, presenting female during the day, and they would say, oh, wait, do you have a show? You don't have a show, do you? Wait, you're not transitioning, are you? You would never do that. And they would kind of answer it for me, and that kind of made me feel like, okay, I don't need to be telling that person anything. So there was a lot of moments of that, and then I'd even talked on the show, there was a moment where a very popular New York queen who's still working as a fierce diva, basically asked me, are you transitioning? I support you, but you'll never work again in the gay community. You know that. So I kind of hid it for a while. Of course, now, since the show, I get to meet other queens who are trans. And it's not new. But it just, in New York, there's just a certain tone to drag. Just like in New York, I think a lot of queens would probably attest to this. For some reason, a lot of the queens are single. I'm not saying anybody up here is single, but when I was
I'm single
in Philly,
I'm not.
We're auctioning her off. When I was growing up in the club scene in Philadelphia, every drag queen was dating the hottest go-go boy. Like that was the pairing. The go-go boys dated, and I'm not saying that you have to date go-go boys. I'm just saying there was never a thing like, oh. Now these days, queens that I know actually hide the fact that they do drag when they go on a first date. And that's something that's, I believe, is transphobic and it's misogynistic, and that's why we have a problem in our queer community.
All right, I think we're going to take some questions for the audience now. How do we do this?
So my birth name is Honesty. My drag name's Frankie Tuckahoe. I'm gender fluid. And I have a strong connection with drag myself, but there's also that men is the people who do drag queen, and women who do it aren't drag queens, they're just dressing up in makeup. So what's your opinion on that?
That's a touchy subject, but my thought is women, when they dress themselves up, if I were to dress myself up as a mermaid, I'm still a guy in drag dressing up as a mermaid. When you dress up as a bio queen mermaid, you're a mermaid, and you're a fairy, and so that I think is the part where some of the drag queens are like, well, you're not really a drag queen, blah blah. But I think that bio queens are not just doing, well, I'm a mermaid. I think that they're embodying the goddess. Like Joey Arias, who's I don't know if anyone knows her. She's one of my idols. She's one of the reasons why I do drag, and she told me when she puts on the makeup, whatever, she calls it the goddess. And when she puts on the goddess, she's the goddess. I'm the goddess when I leave the hotel, I'm the goddess when I return. And I believe that bio queens, I think the bio queen name is wrong. I think they're trying to embody the goddess. That's what I think.
That's sexy, yeah.
I like that.
And how does that relate to queendom?
That's what we do. We're trying to embody the goddess as men. We're trying to create this powerful woman, and at least for me, I'm trying to create a woman and man energy. But drag is it's usually a powerful woman energy. We really praise it. We put it on a pedestal. I think we should. And I think that bio queens are trying to find that in themselves, and that's the goddess. That's what I think.
I agree.
Explain
Yeah.
cute. Yeah. I mean, if drag is drag, I'm kind of for everything, so yeah, whatever.
Yeah, I think the art form will decide. I think, look, drag is not, and it's probably not the last time a woman will hear you can't do something that men are doing.
Yes!
True.
Yes!
So true.
So true.
But I say that,
Yeah.
and I'm sorry we're not supposed to cuss, but if you can do it, and if you're a queen, you're a queen.
Mm-hmm.
That's it.
Okay.
So Tuckahoe, you tuck that hoe, okay? You tuck
And get one of these. Get one of these. Okay, yeah.
I cannot do that. All right, question.
You're the darling.
Name and where you're from.
I'm Mary. I'm from Boston. Sure, cheer for Boston. I was wondering if, especially you guys who have been here in New York for a long time, if you could share one of your favorite stories from LGBT history, something that might not have made it into a documentary, something like Dorian Corey's Closet Corpse. It doesn't have to be true.
It's coming
on
to Broadway.
I'm not going to go
Later.
fact check
I
it
don't know what that
later. It doesn't have to be a true story.
You don't know what
Just
that is? The corpse?
No, I'm sorry.
Did you ever see Paris is Burning? Dorian Corey, if you shoot an arrow in the sky real high, good for you. 5 years later, she had her apartment, and a bunch of friends were like, we got to pick an outfit up for Halloween. And they're like, Dorian got costumes. She's a showgirl. So they're going through her costumes, and in a coat bag is a body that had been mummified and for 20 years. So they couldn't even identify it. With Listerine and like Band-Aids. Yeah.
That's crazy.
So I don't really so you're wondering if there's any more of those stories.
We'll have to go to Acid Betty's closet to find out.
True.
Is there anything for like LGBT history that's pertinent to New York that you guys want people to know?
The answer is yes. There's always queer stories, especially from my perspective, queer stories of people of color who haven't been placed on the front of magazines or been made the subject of documentaries, and there's countless. And
can we talk about how
know?
every single person vogues the house down, and no one actually talks about or looks at the people who are actually voguing, who created it, who are, you know what I mean, or the House of Ninja?
Yeah.
How about that? That's
Let's
a good
talk-
one.
That's
Javier
a big
Ninja?
story right there.
I mean,
Yeah.
I think it's crazy that all these white kids are like doing all this fucking flailing the flies away, and it's like, do you know what you're doing? Do you know where that's from?
You're not lying.
So let's end today with talking about what do you think is next for New York City drag and for you?
Peppermint.
Okay, so for me, right now I'm working on. So last year we were in Europe. We did Bushwick London, Bushwick Berlin. This in November I'm taking Bushwick to Mexico City. Yes, honey, where my roots are. Represent. And then I am doing a Bushwick LA in January.
Damn.
You don't want to commercialize, bitch?
I'm not. Honey, it's
The
my but
definition.
it's my coins though. I don't have other coins. Maybe you could perform in the LA one.
Yeah, but I live in New York, but I'll go.
Oh, you live?
Yeah.
I thought you moved to LA, girl. Sorry.
No, I ain't going. I did not
You're
move
not
to
that
LA.
girl. Ooh.
I'm staying in New York City.
Yeah.
But that's a thing. But while we're on this moment, that is a thing. A lot of the New York queens moved to LA.
I was born in LA, and in Acid Betty. When I moved here, I created Acid Betty. Yeah.
I
Interesting.
Why do you think? Why are the New York girls after the show moving to LA?
I think it's not just the New York girls. There's a
business.
lot of people that move to LA. It's the business, it's show business, and to be honest, I think LA has a different mode than New York for whatever it is, and I think a lot of the folks who were in New York, I mean, the short end of it, if it's a drag race girl, we're never home, and so you don't want to pay the high New York City rent. I think that's the bottom line. Yeah, to hold your it's like a closet.
storage
I've
closet
been in
for
my
your-
house like hours in the past 3 weeks.
Yeah.
You know,
So what about you? What's next for you, Peppermint?
not moving to Los Angeles, and I'm working on some new music, and with a couple of different folks. There's a couple of collaborations in the works, which is nice. Yeah, and there's also we're almost finished with a documentary called Project Peppermint, which has been
Yes.
Thank you. Which has been following me since before Drag Race and all through. And I think they're here today. I don't even know. They're sneaky. So I think the movie's going to come out in 2018.
Awesome. And what about you, Acid Betty? What's next for you?
I don't have any major plans.
She's like, I got new stickers coming out.
Yeah.
I love her stickers.
New
She's
sticker.
like, Stickers.
No, I don't know. I'm
stickers.
always doing stuff, and I've always been doing things. I also have other kinds of jobs that I do. Like I do a lot of design work and stuff for a lot of the people that throw the parties here in New York and stuff. Yeah, so I don't know. I'm not totally sure. I would love to take the art world by storm.
What's next for New York City drag?
I think they're all going to move to Bushwick and Queens.
And Staten Island and Long Island and alrighty, well thank you so much for joining us this morning. Thank you. Let's give it up one more time. Give it up for Acid Betty. Give it up for Horrorchata. And give it up for Peppermint. I'm Alexander Casala. Thank you so much.